Hi friends, my name is Jennifer Hitchcock. I'm an AP Government teacher and I've read for College Board. So I have some experience with this new Quantitative Analysis FRQ. I'd love to spend a couple minutes today talking to you about how to be really successful on this FRQ. In order for us to do this, I have four basic things that I want to talk to you about. The first thing is, why do we do quantitative analysis? Then we'll move on to looking at the question structure. We'll take a look at a prompt and then we'll do some practice. So let's get started. You may be questioning why we do quantitative analysis because it kind of feels like math class. And that's true to a point, but political science uses a lot of quantitative analysis in addition to qualitative analysis, which is looking at primary source documents, to be able to come up with theories that they hypothesize about, they test through collected data, and they analyze. And as we develop more and more information, we're able to come up with some theories as to why things happen in the observable political world. You're going to be doing some lower intensity quantitative analysis that I think you'll be able to handle. So, what will you be asked to do? They'll be presenting you on this FRQ, as well as in other parts of the test, data tables, pie and line charts, other methods of conveying information like maps. All of these things have data in them. And what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to interpret this data to help draw conclusions and apply concepts. Sounds pretty simple. So we might see these in a couple of different units. There's some big ideas that College Board wants us to focus on, like civic participation and representative democracy. So we may see some data charts relating to civil rights and civil liberties, maybe political participation, elections, so on and so forth. You may also see data charts when we're looking at policymaking interests, where maybe we're looking at interactions between branches like veto rates, maybe how many nominees a president has put up, things like that. Civil rights and civil liberties once again pops up on our list. And then a really great place you're going to see it is in Unit 5 when we start talking about political parties, special interest groups, voting, elections, those kinds of things. The last big idea is methods of political analysis, where political scientists measure our behavior, attitudes, and ideologies over time. And so, again, we're going to see this in Unit 5 with our linkage institutions. We're going to see it in Unit 2 when we talk about policymaking institutions. We may see a little bit of it in Unit 1 when we talk about federalism. We may see a little bit of it in Unit 3 when we talk about civil rights and civil liberties. Long story short, you're going to see it, and it will pop up maybe around these different kinds of ideas. So for anticipating them, we may be less anxious when we think about what we have to do with this. So what we do have to do with this is kind of three basic ideas. The first thing is describing data to find patterns that help you draw conclusions. So this means that we have to find a phenomenon and pointing it out with its most significant characteristics, usually using some kind of numerical data to help us. We're going to look at this in a minute. I'm going to give you a real world example. The next thing is drawing conclusions. Here, we're just going to say what the data means, why the data matters, and how the data relates to politics. Finally, we would explain connections to other political events using our data as a limitation that shows us how or why something is happening using that really important buzzword because. And then again, we would use some examples to make logical connections or patterns back to that data. So all of these things are the kinds of thinking activities that you're going to be doing as you're writing your FRQ. Now, a little note, this is a timed writing, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the world's most perfect essay. It's just, can you do these kinds of thinking skills as it relates to this content? So with that in mind, let's think about real world. So I have a screen that you may or may not be familiar with. This is obviously data measurement on a mobile data plan. And so if you take a look at this, we can see there's a lot of information here, and we maybe need to put it into context for it to make sense as to whether or not this is a concerning image. Obviously, if it's the first day of our data plan, it's pretty concerning. If it's the last day of our data plan, it's not concerning at all. So let's interpret. We need to contextualize. We have a plan. Let's pretend 2.5 gigabytes, 30 days. We're on to day 17. We've used 1.66 gigabytes or 1600 megabytes. That puts us at 97.64 megabytes a day. We have 13 days, 840 megabytes. That means we have 64.6 megabytes per day left on average. So this interpretation part requires us to kind of like, we're like describing what we see, right? We're looking here and it's digging deeper into the data than just saying 1.66 gigabytes. We may have to do some rudimentary math to be able to kind of grapple with the situation. So don't be worried if you have to add or subtract, multiply, divide, do some averaging, some modalities, some it's fine. It's all good. It comes out in the wash. Then we have to make some inferences or drawing conclusions. So our conclusion here is that, hey, we're in danger and we have some issues. Like either we can fail to cut our data consumption and have us at an overage of 429 megabytes, or maybe we could cut back on how much we're using. What we definitely can tell here is that Facebook seems to be a really important app in our life. Now, sidebar, this might also indicate that it's an older person because I know that you guys are not using Facebook this much. So our conclusion might be to cut back on Facebook usage, maybe get a bigger data plan, use Wi-Fi as an alternative, or quit Instagram and Snapchat. Now, I put this on here, and if you're looking at this, you may say this doesn't really seem like a great conclusion to draw because it's not a significant draw on the data plan for this individual. And that's true. So I put this up here for a reason. Sometimes when I'm scoring an FRQ, I'll notice that kids get really cute and they kind of have these like really long shot conclusions that they draw or recommendations that they make that can be helpful, but it's not the best answer. So you don't have to worry about coming up with super creative long shot answers. Generally speaking, these prompts are written so that you're just supposed to talk about the most logical conclusion or inference that you can draw from the data. So with that in mind, let's turn our attention to what the actual question looks like. So here's our format. There's 4 sections and each section has 4 points. You're going to notice that not all sections have equivalent effort. That is important for us to remember because sometimes kids, especially in the low effort FRQ sections, kind of punt and they're like, oh, this is easy, I'm going to get the point. Take it seriously. There's a lot of points to lose, even on those easy ones. The other point that I want to make out here is that you have to earn everything in each point has to be right for you to get that point. So make sure that you're really thinking clearly. You don't have to write a lot, but you have to write accurately. My other thing that I wanted to share with you is that the basic format isn't going to change while the prompt, the data set, the kinds of questions and content will. So the skills are not going to change, but the content will shift. So our first point A is identify or describe. And this is, if you see identify is the easiest task verb for us to do because it's really just name it. And that's when I think kids are like, yay, identify, it's a gimme point. Yeah, kids still get it wrong. So make sure that you really are clear in your identification. And the first step to clarity is make sure, and this is going to be a constant theme for today, that you answer the question. What does College Board want to know before you start talking about the chart, table, or graph? Too often, and it's the most heartbreaking thing, a kid looks at a chart, skims the question, and automatically jumps into what they think the chart is saying. But if it's not what College Board wants to see, because it's not in the prompt, you do not get the point. They have a very specific thing that they're looking for. So make sure you ATQ, answer the question. All right. The other thing is make sure that you convert that data from pictorial representation into precise number words. You're using proper nouns and active verbs, action verbs. We really want to get rid of one of the biggest things I can emphasize is no pronouns, no passive voice. Aim to be 2 to 3 sentences, and you should be good here. So the best way to answer the question that I tell my own students is to turn the question into a statement and then proceed. All right, so then we get to the B point, describing trends, patterns, similarity, or difference. So these are not all the same thing. They're going to pick one or the other. So that's why you see the little eyeball there. It means slow down. You need to make sure that you know exactly what they're asking you to do, what kind of thinking skill. Some things you might want to observe are, do we have positive correlations where both variables, the x and the y, if you're looking at a table or a chart, are moving in the same direction, or are they negative? Does one increase, does the other decrease? Does it seem like a really strong correlation where there's a really significant shift, or is it weak? Those are kinds of things that you could identify as trends. Similarities and differences, you really want to look at something that's true of most of the data points. So I am going to give you a word of caution to make sure that you're not looking at the trends that you see between 2 points. You want to take a look at the entirety of the data to make an inference about the correlation between those two different variables that they're comparing. Definitely ATQ, always, right? Restate the question, proceed on, give an answer, period. Use numerical values as examples, not basic adjectives like more or less. Don't fixate on outliers or small breaks in trends. Look for trends that happen over several or all data points, and obvious trends are the best. Don't get cutesy. C, we get to drawing the conclusion again. ATQ. What is the question asking? You know, if they're asking you something in the data, they want you to think of what is the most logical conclusion that can be drawn. Make sure that you're thinking of the larger meaning of the data, particularly your trend or your similarity or difference. Why does it matter? What's the reasoning behind your conclusion? Do you offer evidence? Do you offer numerical data to help you? And the final point is explaining that relation to a principle. And again, this is one point. So here I'm going to talk about assertion, which is restating the question or answering the question, turning into a statement and answering the question. Is your assertion giving evidence from your data and your knowledge of the content and how they're related, and then providing commentary that shows a clear connection between the evidence that you provided and the assertion that you made. All right, those are very, very important. And again, be logical, go for the lowest hanging fruit. You don't have to be super creative. So we get to a prompt. This is our basic structure. You're gonna notice that there's the data is presented, and then you have your A, B, C, D, and then there's this really basic rubric that College Board probably won't provide, but that's kind of the points that they're giving that are consistent throughout. So review the rubric, right? It's always going to be 4 points, one for describing data, one for describing patterns, trends, similarities, and differences, one for describing or drawing a conclusion, and one for your connection, your explanation. In my classroom, and this is a point of contention for a lot of AP teachers, so I'm going to give you some best practices. You do not have to label, but I think as a scorer, it's in your best interest. It makes the scorer be able to accelerate through your essay. If it's not labeled and it's one long, continuous paragraph, they have to slow down to find things, and it makes them stay there longer. They're paying more attention to what you're saying. So you really want to make sure that you're facilitating an easy score for the scorer, right? So skip spaces, I would suggest labeling it, write in ink, so on and so forth. All right. So the next steps, and I know this seems a little kind of elementary, but you really should read the prompt. There's so many times where it's clear to me that the answer does not match with the question that has been asked in the FRQ. So the best way to avoid this is to make sure that you really read and understand that prompt. So underline what's being asked, so on and so forth. Outlining is important. Make sure that you're looking at those key words. Are they asking you to identify or describe an A? Are they asking for you to look at trends or similarities and differences in B? Really kind of digest what's happening. Take a moment to think about what's happening here, and then outline before you get moving into your question. I think a good outline, even if it's just kind of like bullet points, is really helpful in ensuring that the point is awarded for each of these sections. And again, it's about answering the question on this. If you've not repeated the prompt as a statement and then given the most logical answer, then you're kind of already starting off behind the 8 ball. So if we go back and we take a look at the data chart that was presented, here's a really great example of how sometimes we look at something and we're like, oh, I totally know what's going on here, but in reality, we don't. So the first thing that I want to tell you is that, and I don't know if you caught this, this data is not presented in chronological order. I think a lot of students, when they take a look at this, think, oh, it's chronological, but it's not. I mean, or even the other thing, and this is really strange, and I don't think this is intentional, that it's in alphabetical order, because it's in alphabetical order, but I know that's not actually what's going on here at all. If we take a look at this, the most logical explanation of what's happening with the data is that we're looking at an increase in the vetoes through different presidencies. You can kind of see if we draw a line or we smooth our data, which is actually a thing, just kind of trying to find like that straight line that's easier to use. Then we would see that starting with Obama and ending with Reagan, and we have a whole bunch of different skipping around going on in between, that our general trend is that the more vetoes, the more veto overrides. Now, I know we have some outliers. Outliers are data points that don't follow that trend. So Bush 41 and Bush 43 don't necessarily follow the trend, but they don't disprove it either. So I would not freak out if like one or two don't really seem to fit. We still have a really logical trend here that is going to be able to give us a good answer. So here we go to part A. So I've taken the opportunity to repost the question, and then I've given you an example here. So you can go ahead and pause this. I'm not going to read the answers out to you, but I do want to talk to you about why this is a successful answer. So the first thing is, again, we're repeating the prompt is the first thing. We've taken that prompt and we've turned it into a statement with a clear, logical answer. The answer is the lowest hanging answer, right? That this is just, it's vetoes and pocket vetoes between 61 and 2017. 61 and 2017 is really important because now we're starting to get quantitative. We're actually showing that we're not uncomfortable dealing with describing the different variables here, right? We're looking at different presidencies and their veto rates and their veto override rates, and we really need to clearly identify what they are with precise proper nouns, right? Barack Obama. And I told you to be careful with our words like least and most, right? I say least, but then I actually get into exemplifying, like giving you some examples with actual data, right? If I really wanted to like be rigorous here, I would say Barack Obama has the least vetoes with like 2 or whatever it is the data set. All right, so I've described the data set. Moving on to B, which is to describe that trend. It's trend, not similarities and differences. So we want to look for what can we say is true of most, if not all, of these things, right? And we're going to want to show examples using our data, so using numbers. In this case, we don't really have to do any addition, subtraction, mean, median, mode, whatever, which is fine. But again, getting back to this, if you have to, don't freak out. Sometimes thinking about percentages or things like that helps with clarity of your answer, and it certainly wouldn't cause you losing points. So that is B, right? We've got our answer to the question, and we have clear examples that talk to us about our trend that we've identified. Votes increase, veto overrides increase. We've talked about the votes and the veto overrides of each of the presidents that we were pulling out here, so on and so forth. Sounds good. All right, now we move on to C, right? Draw a conclusion about the reasoning for that. And so again, repeating the prompt, turning it into a specific answer that is logical and rational, that Congress is likely to find numbers the more often there's veto overrides. So, and obviously the most logical thing here is that Congress can't perform a veto override if there's no presidential veto preceding it. Data here could be included, doesn't necessarily have to, but it certainly would make a stronger point, right? And D is, how does that a critical component of checks and balances? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you several pieces of evidence. Federalist 51, I'm going to talk about looking at the kind of data from the chart. I've given you 2 pieces of evidence. That's called laying down spare tires to help ensure that you're getting the point. You won't get, they're kind of like looking for an attempt that has an answer in it. And if you put down multiple answers, one of them being wrong, but one of them being correct, as long as the correct answer is there, then you get the point, which is kind of awesome. So that's the purpose of a spare tire, is to ensure that through multiple attempts at the same question, that you're increasing the odds that you get that point awarded. So if we're looking here, veto overrides or critical checks, because here's my assertion, another way to prevent the legislature from being tyrannical. Let's skip down to where I talk about the data. It's hard to override. Here's my evidence requiring 2/3 vote. That's me connecting content from class. Senate finding 66 senators, blah, 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 to vote on a bill is not difficult, but not blah, blah, blah. All right, and then my connection here is the higher voting requirement acts as an insurance policy against the passage of a law that harms a minority. There's my pulling into tyranny, as it requires more support. So that's my ABCD. All right. The final thing that I want to leave you with here is that I have a rubric that I've pulled up together that marries all of these things together, that gives you your prompted stable rubric, your points in terms of like skill set, the intended action that you should be looking to do in that central column, and then a student self-check sheet where you can go through and make sure that you've done all the things we talked about in here, remembering that the stable rubric, the skills stay the same, the content changes. So that is it in summary. Again, looking back over our entire journey here, we've looked over why quantitative analysis works in political science. We've looked at the structure of the quantitative analysis FRQ. We've dabbled a little bit with a prompt and some practices, and you even got a little bonus there of that student check sheet. I wish you the best of luck on this year's AP exam. And if you have questions, come on back. I do a video on all of the FRQs. Best of luck.